Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Andy Bayer. I'm a software developer at CodeHS. I'm joined by Claire, who's our marketing lead, and I'm joined by Emily, who's another software developer at CodeHS. They'll be helping out fielding some questions. They'll be in chat and the Q&A during this presentation. All right, let's go ahead and just jump right in. Today we're going to be talking about the CodeHS IDE. We're going to be talking about how you write code in it, the error messages that you see in it, some features like documentation, navigation, the responsive execution of the IDE, and then where you can use it in the site. So the first question, what is the CodeHS IDE? IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. What that means is it's not just a place where you write code, so it's not just a Word document. You can also run code there. You have access to documentation and even more features that I'm going to be going through in this presentation. So the first thing I want to talk about is writing code. I'm actually going to jump into the IDE right now and take a look. So what makes this better than a Word document or Notepad on your computer? There's a couple of things that make it better. One is something like comments. So you can see here that if you comment out lines, they're highlighted differently. Students can comment their code. The second thing is syntax highlighting. If you're new to IDEs, this is really a very important feature. It helps you understand what's happening in your code, both when you're reading it and also helps your students when they're writing code. So you can see that if I have a function, it highlights the function name differently, the arguments differently, and then any special keywords in JavaScript, like if or else, would be highlighted. Another feature in our IDE is error highlighting on specific lines. So you can see I've written this line on line 10. I have a command move, which is a valid Carol command in our coding programs, but there's this red box next to it. If I hover over that, you see that it tells me what I'm doing wrong. It says you wrote move. It should be move with a semicolon. So the IDE can help students with a lot of common bugs they see, a lot of frustrations they have, by telling them what errors might be in their code as they're writing the code. Next, I'm going to talk about error messages. So in addition to the line errors that students might see, our IDE will also provide helpful error messages for students if they run into bugs when they're coding. So this is another Carol program. As you can see, I'm supposed to make a tower. So if you look, I can run the program. Carol's supposed to make a tower and then turn to the right at the end. But you'll see that there's an error message at the bottom. Oops, there should be one ball at 1, 2, but there are 2. Okay, so that's my first bug. I can read the error message, figure out what's going wrong. So I'll delete that line, run it again. And then I have another error. Carol should be facing east, but is facing north. So all along the process of coding, the IDE can give helpful error messages to your students. So they're not coding alone. They're coding with the help of our error messages, which will tell them maybe some helpful hints about what they might be missing, maybe some syntax errors they have. So I'll go ahead and uncomment this line to try to turn right. And you'll see another kind of error message, which is that Carol doesn't know how to turn right. This is one of the first things that we teach, but you can see how we've created our own error messages that help students out. It's not just these kind of garbled error messages that come up if you're running code outside of CodeHS. We, through working on this curriculum for so long, know the kind of bugs that students run into, and we've added some of our own custom error messages to help out as well. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is test cases. You'll see a test cases tab in the CodeHS IDE next to run code. And this is where it actually shows the requirements for a program to pass. Our programs have auto graders, which are used to make sure that a student's code is completing the requirements in order to get full credit for it. So in the test cases tab, you can hit check code, and you'll see that there are several test cases here. We have test cases for style, which is good coding practice, like your code is indented properly and your commands are correct, have semicolons, things like that. But then there's also test cases for functionality that just make sure that the program is doing what it's actually supposed to do, meaning Carol makes a tower, climbs up, and turns to the right. So you'll see that I'm failing this first test case because Carol isn't in the correct end position. And if I was to have some incorrect indentation, you'd see that I would also fail my style check. My indentation is off on lines 6 and 7. So this error message is very helpful. Students can look directly at this error message and see, oh, it tells me which lines my indentation is off on. They even see this special block on the left side that says they have an indentation error on these lines. They can easily fix it. The IDE works with your students to make sure that they're writing good code. Now I want to talk about documentation. In addition to all the error messages that we have that might explain things to students, we also have a full documentation tab, which talks about everything that they would need to complete these assignments. Again, this is in the right side under Docs. This will be available to you as a teacher and to your students when they're using the IDE. So when they click into the Docs tab, they'll see a full document of everything that Carol the dog can do. This will be different if you're running, for example, a Java program. You would see all of the Java documentation. If you're running Python, you see Python documentation. It changes based on what the programming languages the student is using. So you can see here that I have Carol's commands, functions, conditions, loops, and comments. So I can click into any of these and it'll actually jump me down to that part of the documentation where there's highlighted code that the students can reference, helpful comments that explain the way things work, everything like that. Right. Next, I want to talk about the conversation tab and some of the features that we have for communicating with your students and your students communicating with you. Make sure I'm in the right place here. Okay. So again, this is another one of these tabs on the right side. We have the running code, test cases, docs. We also have the grade tab. This is where you'll actually grade your student, but I want to talk about the conversation tab. So you can click into more and then click conversation. And this is actually a place where you can communicate back and forth with your student. You'll see that I wrote some questions here before and answered them for myself. Me as a teacher wrote, this code doesn't look quite right. You can use the turn right function in your code. You can't use it. And then I can respond. I can say, I need help with this. I'm struggling with the conditions. So you can see that in addition to having code highlighting in here, there's also keyword highlighting. So I wrote the word conditions and it highlighted for the student what a condition is. So if the teacher writes something like, you need to work on your return statements, the student can hover over that word and it'll explain to them what a return statement is. As a teacher, if your student writes to you in the conversation tab, you'll receive a feed of all of the messages that you've gotten from students, so you can work through the feed. All right, next I'm going to talk about navigation in the IDE. So when you're a student and you're working through CodeHS, this is the main page that you see. You're almost always going to be working on coding assignments in our IDE. If you are stuck on an assignment, if you're finished with an assignment, if you want to go back and reference a previous one, we have a lot of navigation features that make it easy for your student to get anywhere they need to in the site and in the course without ever leaving the IDE. On the left side here, we have this tab, which actually is a layout of the entire course that the student is currently working through. You can see that they're currently in Module 1, Lesson 2, More Basic Carol, but they can also navigate through any of the other modules here. They can go to Functions in Carol, view all of the videos, lesson videos, examples, and exercises there. It's also available in the bottom nav. So they can just hover here and they can see any work they've previously done, anything that they need to complete. These will turn green as the student works through it. So it's very easy to find any assignments that you're working on that aren't quite finished yet. Right, I'm going to pause there just to make sure. Claire, Emily, do we have any questions that you think would be good to answer here?
There was one question around just if this is going to be recorded. It will be recorded and we will share it out after to everyone. We also had a few other questions, just if like error messages and test cases are on both CodeHS Free and Pro. And then I think everything else will be typing in some answers for those as well. So
yeah, all of these error messages, everything I've talked about should be available in free. Error messages are available in free. Test cases are free. All of the syntax highlighting, yeah, all of that are free. I see another question. What does IDE stand for? It stands for Integrated Development Environment. It's used a lot in the industry and kind of thrown around. I actually didn't know what it stood for until I started working on this webinar. But basically what it means is it's not just where you write code. It's where you write code plus all these extra features. It really wraps everything you need in order to develop into one place. Robert, your question about copy and paste controls, I think we can answer that in the chat, but that's definitely a good question, and we can talk about that at the end if we need help. Yeah, Lydia, IDE is Integrated Development Environment. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. If there's any more questions, feel free to interrupt me, Claire.
Sounds good. Thanks, Andy.
For sure. So the next feature I want to talk about is the Code History tab. This is a feature I love in the IDE. I think this is a super helpful one. In the More tab again, students can navigate to the History tab, and teachers can do this as well. And this shows a full breakdown of everything they've done in the assignment, starting from the very beginning, where they just had a completely blank, empty canvas, and every snapshot along the way that took them to their current answer. So you can see, I started this assignment, today's the 30th, right? Yeah, I started this yesterday around noon. And then over the next couple minutes, I worked through it, adding commands. And then finally, I got to the solution on around 2:30 yesterday. As a teacher, this is very helpful. You can see how students are progressing through a problem. It's fun and very insightful to see where students get stuck. You can see as they're going through, maybe where they're commenting things out, changing conditions. The other thing that I can do that is really useful is, say I completely messed my code up. I accidentally delete everything, and now I'm like, oh no, I lost all my progress. I can go back to the History tab and find the last time that I had code that I want to return to. So you'll see that currently I have nothing. I deleted it all. It's over. It's a nightmare. But if I go back to my previous snapshot, I can actually just click on that and it'll restore my code to what it was yesterday at 2:30 p.m. This lets the student go back to any previous working version they had. They can explore the way things were before if they made a change and they want to go back. But you can also, as a teacher, go through all these previous snapshots they had, set them in the editor, and run them just to see how your student's program progressed over time. Cool. All right, I want to talk about kind of the responsive nature of the CodeHS IDE. What I mean by this is for every different program language and program type, the IDE functions slightly differently. So you'll see here that this is my sandbox. I've just created some programs. I have a Carol program, a Java graphics program, a Java main program. It doesn't really matter what exactly they are, just the fact that they're different. So you'll see that in this Java main program, I'm going to be running Java code. And so I don't need graphics necessarily. I definitely don't need Carol the dog moving around picking up tennis balls. All I need is to see text output. And so you'll see that the IDE looks slightly differently. On the right side here, we just have text output. And in the Docs tab, we have a completely different documentation set. So we have everything that you need to write Java. If I were to work on, for example, an HTML program, which I have open here, you'll see that the right side here is actually replaced with a tiny browser. So it can view images. I can put HTML in there. The IDE will respond to the different program types and programming languages that you're running by replacing different elements so that your students can actually see what the program is doing, use the different elements of the Docs tab. You might see this on the left side. In a program type like HTML, I can actually create new files and switch between files. So I can create a second file here. But all of these things change based on the kind of program that you're running. All right. I want to talk now about where you can use the IDE. The IDE is present in a couple of places. The most obvious one that we've talked about is coding assignments. When your students are working through their intro JavaScript course or their AP Java course, they're going to be using the IDE everywhere. You can also use the IDE in the CodeHS Sandbox and in practice. I'm going to show Sandbox first. So the CodeHS Sandbox is available at codehs.com/editor/sandbox. I have it open right here, but you'll see this is a place where you can just create a program of any type you want. It's not linked to any curriculum. It's not linked to even necessarily a course. This is just a place where you can play with the IDE. So I can create a new program, and I can choose from any programming language that I want. You'll see that we have Java and Python and HTML, we have C++, C. We have all these different types. And for each one of these, the IDE is going to behave slightly differently. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a C++ program. And you'll see that the right side here is set up just for outputting text, because we're not going to have images in the C++ program. Sorry, I have 20 tabs open right now, so this is a little slow. But yeah, you can see that just off the bat, we were able to start using the CodeHS IDE with a C++ program. We could have done a virtual reality program. We could have done a blocks coding program. And the IDE will behave slightly different for all of those. So I want to talk now about practice. Practice is a new feature this year, and it's a really great place where you can use the IDE in quick programming assignments. You can go to codehs.com/practice to access this. I have it pulled up right here. It's a page that just has for several programming languages, for Java, JavaScript, Python, and C++. We have dozens of programs that you can use in the IDE. So again, this isn't linked to a course. This isn't linked to necessarily the grades that you're giving your students. This is just a place where you can access the IDE, try a different programming language, try to solve some fun problems. So we can pop into one of these programs. You'll see it loads the IDE with the challenge for this program. And you'll see that actually for a practice program, we have a slightly different view. We have the description of how the program needs to work and the test cases directly here on the right side. Okay, so that's actually all I had planned to discuss, but I see that we've gotten some questions. So I'm actually going to go through some of those and maybe dive back into a couple of these things. So Deborah was asking about the Docs tab, how you can navigate the Docs tab to get help with the problem. So I'm actually just going to use the previous Java assignment I was working on here. So I'll just kind of imagine I'm a student, I'm working through this program, I'm kind of frustrated, I'm not able to figure out what's going on. How do I figure out with the Docs tab how to pass this code? So on the right side here, we have several tabs. If the student navigates to the Docs tab, they'll be taken to all of our documentation. And these are actual hyperlinks that your student can click that will take them to documentation specific on what they need to work on. So let's just take a look at, right, this is a method. So maybe I'll jump into the methods part of the Java documentation. And I can read a little bit about methods. So if we remember, my error here was that I'm missing a return statement. In the Docs tab here, I can see, okay, methods can return a value. I can right here see the code that I need to use. I need to return something. So let's just go ahead and return 2. And then if I run that, we'll get a different error message now, but at least we figured out we needed a return statement. Yeah, Lydia, that's correct. The question was about Sandbox and Practice being logged in. Sandbox and Practice are both available logged out. So your students, even if they don't have a CodeHS account, can start using Practice and just mess around, work on a program like this, try to do some basic math in Java or JavaScript. They can also use the Sandbox if you just want your students to really quickly create a JavaScript program. But you can also log in and then save your progress on those. It looks like I actually don't have access to the QA. I don't know where the window is. So are there any questions in there, Claire?
In the Q&A? Yep, yeah. We have a few questions in there. So one question is, do error messages show up in the Python courses? I know Emily and I were chatting about that, and it shows up slightly differently. Would you mind giving an example of that?
Yes, so just how errors appear in different programming languages?
Yeah, one specifically was Python. Yep.
Okay, yeah, let me see if I can pull a Python exercise up. So I'll go back to the Sandbox here.
Thanks, Sandy.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to create a Python exercise. And we can just see how the errors appear here. Yeah, again, maybe I shouldn't have all these tabs open. I'm going to close all the other tabs. Are there any other questions while I'm getting this Python example set up?
Yeah, we have a few questions that are related a little bit more towards communication with students. Just wondering if it's a way to possibly like communicate directly with just one student without sending an announcement to everyone and not actually being within or attached to a direct assignment. And then just where teachers are alerted when students start conversations with them.
Gotcha.
So those are a little different, but.
Yeah, so Emily, if you could actually talk a little bit about the communication outside of assignments, is that something that you maybe know a bit more about? Oh, maybe not. Okay. I'm actually not positive about that. So that's something we can get back to you on. I know that we've been working on a lot of that just because that's become a lot more required since classrooms have become virtual, is communicating directly with students. So that is something we're definitely working on. I'm not sure the status of it right now.
Yeah, definitely. And then to answer the other question just about the code review and where you're alerted when students communicate with you, whether that's through a direct assignment, that will be on the top of your code review page. As a teacher, you should see a notification pop up there.
Okay, so we're now set up with a Python 2 editor. So we can talk a little bit about how the error messages might appear here. It's slightly different for every programming language just because we run each language a little bit differently. But I'm just going to go ahead and create an error right now. You'll see that we get an error message here that says we have a bad token on line 1, and we highlight the line where we have an error. We can fix that error then. In terms of actually informing us about any line errors that we have, like in Carol, how we were able to show when you were missing a semicolon, I don't think that exists, just because Python is a lot more complex of a language. Excuse me. In a more simple language like Carol, we know pretty much everything a student should be able to write, but in a very robust language like Python, it's not always possible for us to figure out from just reading the code what a possible error might be, but we absolutely do highlight errors in Python when you try to run the code by highlighting the line in yellow, giving a little bit information about what the error message might be. Let me know if that answers your question.
And Andy, we have a few more questions, but some of these we'll just write some answers to. So we'll take a minute to pause as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Feel free to write more questions in. We'll take a couple minutes so that if you have any questions, we can get those answered before the webinar is over. I see that there's more Q&A questions. I just can't open the window. So is there anything else?
Let me read through some of these here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Robert has a question about just wondering how to effectively use the debug and step feature in courses. So I guess as students are working on that, what's an effective way of kind of using that as they're going through the course? Robert, let me know if that's
for sure. Yeah. Let me open up a program where I can show the step features. So in Carol, all these Carol programs are about moving around. They're about moving Carol through the world. And so we actually have step features that you can use to step one command at a time through the Carol program. So you can see that in addition to the run and reset buttons here on the right side, I actually have these step backward, pause, and step forward buttons. So a lot of times you'll see when you're working on Carol, Carol will run into a wall. And that can be frustrating for students. They will often run a program and be like, oh, what went wrong? How did this program crash? Using those step features, the stepping forward and backward, you can find out exactly what went wrong. So I'm now at the point where Carol has crashed into a wall, I can move backwards in time and figure out, oh, what was Carol doing right before Carol crashed into the wall, to try to figure out what's wrong with my code. I can also go one step at a time and make sure that my code is running exactly how I think it should. I can change the speed of the execution. So if it's very fast, it's sometimes hard to see what exactly happened. But if I slow it down, I can make sure that I know exactly what is happening and try to like think through the program as it's going. These step features aren't available in all of our programming languages. Carol is, I believe, the one place where it's available right now, just because, like I said, other programming languages tend to be pretty vast, and it's difficult for us to set that up. But in the Carol exercises, which should be generally the first place where your students will be working in CodeHS, they can use these debug tools to step forward and backward in the program. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a few more that we're working through typing. If there's one that we should say out loud, I'll let you know, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Claire.
Andy, we have a question about the sandbox and how a teacher could use it. So if they could create a Java programming assignment for their students and have their students create it in the sandbox, can she see their work and then also be able to grade it? Like, what's that process with the sandbox, or does that have to be a course?
So the sandbox is not designed to be graded. The sandbox is really just a place for your students to mess around, like kind of get their hands dirty with programming. You can absolutely create an assignment, and it doesn't have to be in CodeHS, and have your students work through it in the sandbox. They can then send you their code, and you can just look at it directly. You can't grade directly in the sandbox, but you can create a playlist or course and copy your program from the sandbox to that playlist or course and assign it to your students there. We have some more knowledge-based articles about that, about how to create a playlist or course that you can put custom problems into that we can send out. But yeah, the sandbox, you can't grade code in the sandbox. Like I said, it's more, yeah, a place to just kind of mess around and work without any fear of a grade.
Andy, I think we'll have time to answer a few more questions here. I know you can't see the Q&A, but I would say if anyone has any other questions that don't get answered during the webinar, please reach out to our team, our support team at hello@codehs.com after the webinar, and we'll certainly make sure that we get you those answers if they don't get answered now. Okay, Andy, I think we're good to wrap up. We'll reach out to every other question that's here that hasn't been answered yet, or we'll have our team follow up after this. But I think we're probably good to wrap up, Andy, unless you see anything else in the chat as well.
No, I think that's good. Yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to forward them to me. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. This was great. I love the IDE. It's one of the favorite parts of the site for me. I guess if there's a takeaway, it's understanding the IDE is more than just a place for writing code. It's the integrated development environment. It has everything your students need to work through programs. That includes error messages that can help them, a docs tab that can help them understand how to solve problems, communication for you to talk with your students and help them through things. Yeah, the CodeHS IDE is very powerful. There's a lot of features I haven't even covered in this presentation, but if you're curious and want to poke around, you can just head into the More tab on the right side here and see a lot of the other things that we have to offer. All right,